President Trump has fired off more social media posts asserting his desire to take over Greenland, his expansionist vision for America.
For decades, Greenland's ice was thought to be empty and untouched. Then scientists scanned beneath it and uncovered something that was never meant to be found. Beneath Greenland's frozen surface, scientists uncovered evidence of a hidden Cold War project so massive it resembled an underground nuclear city. What started as routine research quickly turned into a chilling discovery involving secret tunnels, reactors, and military planning. And the deeper they looked, the stranger it became. Stay with me, because this discovery changes what we thought we knew about hidden military history. The unexpected discovery. Picture this scene for a moment. You're flying over one of the most barren, desolate places on Earth. Nothing but endless white ice stretches in every direction as far as the eye can see. NASA scientist Chad Green was aboard a Gulfstream 3 aircraft in April 2024, flying roughly 150 miles east of Patuxent Space Base in northern Greenland. The team was conducting a routine survey of the Greenland ice sheet, monitoring their radar instruments as they probed the thick ice below. The scientists were focused on mapping the bedrock beneath the ice sheet, studying layers that could help them understand future sea level changes. Their sophisticated radar equipment was sending signals deep into the ice, bouncing back data about what lay hidden beneath. Then something completely unexpected appeared on their screens. The radar had detected structures that clearly weren't natural formations. Alex Gardner, a scientist from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, remembers the moment vividly. The team had no idea what they were looking at initially. They were searching for geological features, not man-made structures. But there it was, clear as day on their monitors. The radar had picked up what appeared to be a network of tunnels and buildings buried deep within the ice sheet. After analyzing the location and comparing it with historical records, the shocking truth emerged. They had accidentally discovered Camp Century, an abandoned United States military base that's been entombed in ice since 1967. This wasn't just any military outpost. This was a full-scale underground city, complete with tunnels, living quarters, and facilities that once housed up to 200 soldiers. The discovery sent ripples through the scientific community and reignited interest in one of the Cold War's most ambitious and secretive projects. The city under the ice. Camp Century earned a fascinating nickname during its operational years. People called it the City Under the Ice, and that name wasn't an exaggeration. This was a genuinely remarkable engineering achievement that pushed the boundaries of what seemed possible in Arctic construction. The United States Army Corps of Engineers began building this underground complex in June 1959, and they completed it by October 1960. The speed of construction was impressive, considering the extreme conditions they faced. The base consisted of 21 separate tunnels carved directly into the ice sheet. When you add up all those tunnels together, they stretched for nearly 3 kilometers, or roughly 9,800 feet. That's almost 2 miles of underground passageways hollowed out beneath the frozen surface. Engineers used specialized Swiss-made machines called Peter plows to dig deep trenches in the snow and ice. These trenches were then covered with arched roofs, and prefabricated buildings were erected inside them. What made Camp Century truly feel like a city were all the amenities packed into those frozen corridors. The base included sleeping quarters for the soldiers stationed there, medical facilities with a fully equipped hospital, recreational areas with a theater and gym, a chapel for religious services, a library, dining halls, laundry facilities, and even a shop where soldiers could buy supplies. Everything you might find in a small town was compressed into this subterranean network beneath the ice. The living conditions were remarkably comfortable for such a remote location. The base was heated and powered by something truly groundbreaking for its time. Camp Century was one of the first facilities in the world to be powered by a portable nuclear reactor. The PM-2A reactor provided electricity and warmth to the entire complex, making life bearable in one of the harshest environments on the planet. At its peak operation, Camp Century housed between 85 and 200 soldiers who lived and worked in this frozen underground world. The cover story. When Camp Century was being built, the public was told a very specific story about its purpose. The United States Department of Defense presented the base to Danish officials in the world as a scientific research station. They explained that the facility would serve multiple legitimate purposes. First, it would test various construction techniques needed for building in extreme Arctic conditions. Second, it would allow engineers to work out practical problems with operating a portable nuclear reactor in such a challenging environment. Third, it would support important scientific experiments on the Greenland ice cap. And here's the interesting part. That cover story wasn't entirely false. Real scientific research actually did happen at Camp Century, and some of it turned out to be incredibly valuable. Scientists at the base conducted some of the first ever ice core drilling operations. They extracted long cylinders of ice from deep within the ice sheet, and these cores contained trapped air bubbles and particles that provided climate data going back more than 100,000 years. These ice cores became fundamental tools for understanding Earth's climate history. Researchers still cite and use data from those Camp Century ice cores in climate studies today. The scientists also drilled through to the soil beneath the ice sheet, and those soil samples would later reveal surprising secrets about Greenland's ancient past. The facility was even featured in mainstream media. The Saturday Evening Post magazine ran a profile of Camp Century in 1960, showcasing it as an impressive demonstration of American ingenuity and Arctic research capabilities. The Army even produced a promotional film about Camp Century, presenting it as a remote research community where brave soldiers and scientists worked together to unlock the secrets of the Arctic. For years, this was the narrative that the public believed. Camp Century was just another Cold War-era research station, similar to other bases established in harsh environments around the world. But the reality was far more complex and considerably more alarming than the official story suggested. Project Iceworm, the real mission. Behind the scientific facade lay a top-secret military operation that wouldn't be revealed to the public for decades. Project Iceworm was the real reason Camp Century existed, and its true scope was absolutely staggering. According to documents that were finally declassified in 1996, the United States Army had developed plans for something unprecedented. They wanted to build a vast network of nuclear missile launch sites hidden beneath the Greenland ice sheet. The strategic thinking behind this plan made sense from a Cold War perspective. Greenland's location put it relatively close to the Soviet Union, making it an ideal position for deploying intermediate-range ballistic missiles. The ice sheet itself would provide natural camouflage and protection. Missiles hidden beneath hundreds of feet of ice would be extremely difficult for enemy forces to locate and target. Even if the Soviet Union launched a first strike against known American military installations, these hidden Arctic missiles would survive to retaliate. The full scope of Project Iceworm was mind-boggling. Military planners envisioned an underground tunnel system covering approximately 52,000 square miles. To put that in perspective, that's roughly 3 times the size of the entire country of Denmark. The plan called for deploying up to 600 nuclear missiles throughout this frozen network. These missiles would be spread out, positioned about 4 miles apart from each other in separate launch trenches. The Army planned to build 60 launch control centers to manage these weapons, and the entire operation would require approximately 11,000 soldiers living full-time beneath the ice. Here's something that caused major political problems later. The Danish government had approved the construction of Camp Century as a scientific research station, but American officials never told them about Project Iceworm. Denmark technically had sovereignty over Greenland, and this massive military operation was being planned and tested on Danish territory without their knowledge or consent. When the truth finally came out decades later, it created serious diplomatic tensions between the United States and Denmark. The nuclear reactor. At the heart of Camp Century sat a technological marvel that was years ahead of its time. The PM-2A portable nuclear reactor was a genuine engineering breakthrough. This wasn't some massive building-sized reactor like you'd find in a nuclear power plant. The entire system was designed to be mobile and relatively compact, specifically engineered for use in remote military installations where traditional power sources weren't practical. The reactor shipment alone weighed 400 tons. Getting all that equipment to Camp Century was an incredible logistical challenge. Heavy equipment had to be transported from Thule Air Base using specialized bobsleds that could only travel at a maximum speed of 2 miles per hour through the harsh Arctic conditions. The PM-2A reactor operated successfully for 33 months, providing electricity and heat to the entire underground complex. However, by mid-1962, just 2 years after installation, the ceiling of the reactor room had started to sag under the weight of the ice above it. The reactor was removed in the summer of 1964 and never returned. Life in the frozen fortress. What was it actually like to live and work in this bizarre underground world? Dr. Robert Weiss, who served as the camp doctor during tours in 1962 and 1963, has shared vivid memories of his time beneath the ice. He was just 26 years old when he was sent to sit under the ice cap 800 miles from the North Pole. The soldiers and scientists stationed at Camp Century lived in a surreal environment. Above them stretched hundreds of feet of solid ice, and the temperature outside could plummet to minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the tunnels, life was surprisingly comfortable. The nuclear reactor kept the temperature at livable levels, and soldiers could watch movies in the theater, work out in the gym, attend religious services in the chapel, or relax in the common areas. But living at Camp Century came with unique challenges. The ice wasn't as stable as engineers had hoped. The tunnels constantly needed maintenance because the ice walls would slowly deform and bulge inward over time. Despite appearing solid on the surface, the Greenland ice sheet is actually in constant, slow movement, spreading outward from its center like an incredibly slow-motion glacier. Why the project failed? Project Iceworm turned out to be fatally flawed from the beginning, and the problems became apparent surprisingly quickly. Within just 3 years after Camp Century's tunnels were excavated, scientists working at the base made a troubling discovery. The ice core samples they were drilling revealed that the Greenland ice sheet was moving much faster than military planners had anticipated. The ice was flowing and deforming at a rate that would destroy any permanent tunnel system within approximately 2 years. This revelation was devastating for Project Iceworm. The entire concept depended on the ice being stable enough to maintain a vast network of tunnels and missile silos for years, or even decades. By 1966, it was clear that Project Iceworm was never going to work. The Joint Chiefs of Staff rejected the project, and military planners canceled the entire operation. Camp Century itself struggled on for 1 more year, but in 1967, the Army made the decision to completely abandon the facility. They removed the nuclear reactor and its radioactive components, but they left behind most of the base's infrastructure, equipment, and waste materials. What NASA's new technology revealed. For decades after Camp Century was abandoned, scientists occasionally flew over the area with ground-penetrating radar equipment. These surveys could detect the presence of the base buried beneath the ice, but the technology only provided basic 2-dimensional profiles. You could tell something was there, but you couldn't see much detail about the structures themselves. Everything changed with NASA's April 2024 flight. The team was using cutting-edge technology called UAVSAR, which stands for Uninhabited Aerial Vehicle Synthetic Aperture Radar. This advanced system looks both downward and at an angle, capturing signals from multiple directions. The UAVSAR images revealed Camp Century in stunning detail never seen before. Individual structures within the secret city became visible as distinct features. By comparing the new radar map with historical blueprints of Camp Century's planned layout, scientists could see that the parallel structures in the radar images aligned perfectly with the tunnels that were built to house various facilities. The buried waste problem. Camp Century might be frozen and abandoned, but it represents a ticking environmental time bomb. When the Army evacuated the base in 1967, they removed the nuclear reactor chamber to prevent catastrophic radiation leaks. However, they left behind almost everything else. The assumption that the ice would entomb this waste forever made sense at the time, but it didn't account for one crucial factor that nobody was seriously considering in the 1960s: climate change. A comprehensive study in 2016 took inventory of exactly what's still buried at Camp Century, and the numbers are alarming. The site contains approximately 200,000 liters of diesel fuel. That's about 53,000 gallons, which is enough fuel for a car to drive around the entire planet 80 times. There's also an estimated 240,000 liters of wastewater, including sewage from the years when soldiers lived at the base. That works out to roughly 63,000 gallons of biological waste frozen in the ice. Based on typical building materials used in Arctic construction during that era, researchers believe the site likely contains polychlorinated biphenyls, commonly known as PCBs. These are toxic chemical compounds that were widely used in electrical equipment and building materials during the 1950s and 1960s, before we understood how dangerous they were. PCBs are now known to cause serious health problems and persist in the environment for decades. Perhaps most concerning is the radioactive waste. Although the main reactor was removed, the PM2A generated substantial amounts of low-level radioactive coolant during its 3 years of operation. The Atomic Heritage Foundation estimates the reactor produced more than 47,000 gallons of radioactive waste over its lifetime. Nobody knows exactly how much of that waste is still buried at Camp Century, or in what condition it might be. Radar images from 2011 show what scientists believe is the buried waste field, but without better imaging, they can't determine if any containers have degraded or begun leaking. The climate change threat. The Arctic is warming faster than any other region on Earth. This is a well-documented scientific fact. Temperatures in Greenland have been rising at approximately twice the global average rate. The Greenland ice sheet, which has seemed permanent and unchanging for millennia, is actually melting at an accelerating pace. This creates a serious problem for the waste buried at Camp Century. When Camp Century was abandoned in 1967, it sat roughly 26 feet beneath the surface of the ice. Over the following decades, continuous snowfall has buried it even deeper. Current estimates suggest the base now sits approximately 100 to 115 feet below the surface. For a long time, this increasing burial depth seemed to support the original assumption that Camp Century would remain safely entombed forever. Every year, more snow falls. Every year, the base sank deeper into the ice. But climate models tell a very different story about the future. William Colgan, a climate and glacier scientist at York University who co-authored a major study on this issue, explains the problem clearly. When researchers ran climate simulations for the Camp Century area, they found something troubling. Rather than perpetual snowfall continuing to bury the site deeper, the models suggest the area could transition from net snowfall to net melting as early as 2090. That transition point is critical. Once the site starts experiencing more melting than snowfall accumulation, it's only a matter of time before the waste begins to be exposed. The process becomes irreversible. As the protective ice layer thins, the waste materials could start leaching into meltwater. That contaminated water would eventually flow through the ice sheet and potentially reach the coast about 250 kilometers away. Some estimates suggest serious contamination could begin occurring sometime in the 22nd century. A more recent 2021 assessment provided slightly better news. Scientists found that meltwater hasn't yet penetrated very deep at the Camp Century site. In fact, meltwater has never gone deeper than about 1.1 meters into the ice. Weather measurements taken directly at Camp Century allowed researchers to calibrate their climate models more accurately, and these updated projections suggest there's no chance of waste remobilization before the year 2100. Still, that's only a few decades away, and the long-term trend remains concerning. Political and scientific implications. The Camp Century situation raises complicated questions about responsibility and accountability. Who is responsible for cleaning up this mess if the waste starts to leak? The United States built the base and left the waste behind, but it was on Greenland's territory. Denmark has sovereignty over Greenland, but the Danish government wasn't even informed about the true purpose of Project Iceworm when it was happening. This creates a potential political dispute that nobody considered when Camp Century was abandoned. The scientific value of Camp Century extends far beyond its Cold War history. Those ice cores and soil samples that scientists collected during the base's operation have revolutionized our understanding of Earth's climate history. In 2019, researcher Paul Bierman and his team at the University of Vermont began studying soil samples from Camp Century that had been stored in freezers for decades. Inside those jars of frozen soil, they discovered something extraordinary. The soil contained bits of leaves, twigs, moss, and even insect remains. These organic materials could only have come from a time when the Camp Century location was completely free of ice. Using modern dating techniques, Biermann's team determined that the area was ice-free approximately 400,000 years ago. This discovery completely changed scientific understanding of Greenland's ice sheet. Previous estimates suggested the ice sheet was several million years old, essentially permanent. The Camp Century soil proved it was much younger and more vulnerable than anyone had realized. This finding has profound implications for understanding future climate change. If Greenland's ice sheet melted away just 400,000 years ago, during a period when global temperatures were only slightly warmer than today, it means the ice sheet is far less stable than we thought. When that ancient ice melted, sea levels worldwide were significantly higher than they are now. If the Greenland ice sheet melts again in our warming world, it could release quadrillions of gallons of fresh water into the oceans, raising sea levels enough to flood coastal cities and displace billions of people. Camp Century represents an extraordinary chapter in Cold War history. This underground nuclear city, hidden beneath Greenland's ice for nearly 6 decades, tells a story of human ambition, engineering prowess, political secrecy, and environmental consequences. NASA's accidental rediscovery of the base in April 2024 has brought this forgotten relic back into public consciousness, reminding us that the choices we make today can have impacts that echo for generations. What do you think? Should nations work together to clean up the buried waste before climate change exposes it? Or should we monitor the site and wait to see if the predicted melting actually occurs? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.